The Snow Queen in 7 Stories by Hans Christian Andersen. 4th Story. The Prince and Princess. Gerda was obliged to rest again, and just opposite the place where she sat, she saw a great crow come hopping across the snow toward her. He stood looking at her for some time, and then he wagged his head and said, "Caw, caw, good day, good day." He pronounced the words as plainly as he could, because he meant to be kind to the little girl, and then he asked her where she was going all alone in the wide world. The word alone Gerda understood very well, and knew how much it expressed. So then she told the crow the whole story of her life and adventures, and asked him if he had seen little Kay. The crow nodded his head very gravely and said, "Perhaps I have. It may be." "No, do you think you have?" cried little Gerda, and she kissed the crow and hugged him almost to death with joy. "Gently, gently," said the crow. "I believe I know. I think it may be little Kay, but he has certainly forgotten you by this time for the princess." "Does he live with a princess?" asked Gerda. "Yes. Listen," replied the crow. "But it is so difficult to speak your language. If you understood the crow's language, then I can explain it better. Do you?" "No, I have never learnt it," said Gerda, "but my grandmother understands it and used to speak it to me. I wish I had learnt it." "It does not matter," answered the crow. "I will explain as well as I can, although it will be very badly done." And he told her what he had heard. "In this kingdom where we now are," said he, "there lives a princess who is so wonderfully clever that she has read all the newspapers in the world and forgotten them too, although she is so clever. A short time ago, as she was sitting on her throne, which people say is not such an agreeable seat as is often supposed, she began to sing a song which commences in these words: 'Why should I not be married?' 'Why not indeed?' said she, and so she determined to marry if she could find a husband who knew what to say when he was spoken to, and not one who could only look grand, for that was so tiresome. Then she assembled all her court ladies together at the beat of the drum, and when they heard of her intentions, they were very much pleased. 'We are so glad to hear it,' said they. 'We were talking about it ourselves the other day.' 'You may believe that every word I tell you is true,' said the crow, 'for I have a tame sweetheart who goes freely about the palace, and she told me all this.' Of course, his sweetheart was a crow, for birds of a feather flock together, and one crow always chooses another crow. Newspapers were published immediately, with a border of hearts and the initials of the princess among them. They gave notice that every young man who was handsome was free to visit the castle and speak with the princess, and those who could reply loud enough to be heard when spoken to were to make themselves quite at home at the palace. But the one who spoke best would be chosen as a husband for the princess. Yes, yes, you may believe me, it is all as true as I sit here," said the crow. The people came in crowds. There was a great deal of crushing and running about, but no one succeeded either on the first or second day. They could all speak very well while they were outside in the streets, but when they entered the palace gates and saw the guards in silver uniforms, and the footmen in their golden livery on the staircase, and the great halls lighted up, they became quite confused. And when they stood before the throne on which the princess sat, they could do nothing but repeat the last words she had said, and she had no particular wish to hear her own words over again. It was just as if they had all taken something to make them sleepy while they were in the palace, for they did not recover themselves nor speak till they got back again into the street. There was quite a long line of them, reaching from the town gate to the palace. "I went myself to see them," said the crow. They were hungry and thirsty, for at the palace they did not get even a glass of water. Some of the wisest had taken a few slices of bread and butter with them, but they did not share it with their neighbors. They thought if they went in to see the princess looking hungry, there would be a better chance for themselves. "But Kay, tell me about little Kay," said Gerda. "Was he amongst the crowd?" "Stop a bit. We are just coming to him." It was on the third day. There came marching cheerfully along to the palace a little personage without horses or carriage, his eyes sparkling like yours. He had beautiful long hair, but his clothes were very poor. "That was Kay," said Gerda joyfully. "Oh, then I have found him." And she clapped her hands. "He had a little knapsack on his back," added the crow. "No, it must have been his sledge," said Gerda, "for he went away with it." "It may have been so," said the crow. "I did not look at it very closely, but I know from my tame sweetheart that he passed through the palace gates, saw the guards in their silver uniform and the servants in their liveries of gold on the stairs, but he was not in the least embarrassed. 'It must be very tiresome to stand on the stairs,' he said. 'I prefer to go in.' The rooms were blazing with light. Counselors and ambassadors walked about with bare feet carrying golden vessels. It was enough to make anyone feel serious. His boots creaked loudly as he walked, and yet he was not at all uneasy. 'It must be Kay,' said Gerda. 'I know he had new boots on. I have heard them creak in grandmother's room.' 'They really did creak,' said the crow. Yet he went boldly up to the princess herself, who was sitting on a pearl as large as a spinning wheel, and all the ladies of the court were present with their maids, and all the cavaliers with their servants. And each of the maids had another maid to wait upon her, and the cavalier servants had their own servants, as well as a page each. They all stood in circles round the princess, and the nearer they stood to the door, the prouder they looked. The servants' pages, who always wore slippers, could hardly be looked at. They held themselves up so proudly by the door. 'It must be quite awful,' said little Gerda. 'But did Kay win the princess?' 'If I had not been a crow,' said he, 'I would have married her myself, although I am engaged.' He spoke just as well as I do when I speak the crow's language, so I heard from my tame sweetheart. He was quite free and agreeable, and said he had not come to woo the princess, but to hear her wisdom. And he was as pleased with her as she was with him." "Oh, certainly that was Kay," said Gerda. "He was so clever. He could work mental arithmetic and fractions. Oh, will you take me to the palace?" "It is very easy to ask that," replied the crow, "but how are we to manage it? However, I will speak about it to my tame sweetheart and ask her advice. For I must tell you, it will be very difficult to gain permission for a little girl like you to enter the palace." "Oh, yes, but I shall gain permission easily," said Gerda, "for when Kay hears that I am here, he will come out and fetch me in immediately." "Wait for me here by the palings," said the crow, wagging his head as he flew away. It was late in the evening before the crow returned. "Caw, caw," he said. "She sends you greeting, and here is a little roll which she took from the kitchen for you. There is plenty of bread there, and she thinks you must be hungry. It is not possible for you to enter the palace by the front entrance. The guards in silver uniform and the servants in gold livery would not allow it. But do not cry, we will manage to get you in. My sweetheart knows a little back staircase that leads to the sleeping apartments, and she knows where to find the key." Then they went into the garden through the great avenue, where the leaves were falling one after another, and they could see the light in the palace being put out in the same manner. And the crow, led little Gerda to the back door, which stood ajar. Oh, how little Gerda's heart beat with anxiety and longing. It was just as if she were going to do something wrong, and yet she only wanted to know where little Kay was. It must be he, she thought, with those clear eyes and that long hair. She could fancy she saw him smiling at her as he used to at home when they sat among the roses. He would certainly be glad to see her and to hear what a long distance she had come for his sake, and to know how sorry they had been at home because he did not come back. Oh, what joy and yet fear she felt. They were now on the stairs, and in a small closet at the top a lamp was burning. In the middle of the floor stood the tame crow, turning her head from side to side and gazing at Gerda, who curtsied as her grandmother had taught her to do. "My betrothed has spoken so very highly of you, my little lady," said the tame crow. "Your life history, Vita, as it may be called, is very touching. If you will take the lamp, I will walk before you. We will go straight along this way, then we shall meet no one." "It seems to me as if somebody were behind us," said Gerda, as something rushed by her like a shadow on the wall, and then horses with flying manes and thin legs, hunters, ladies and gentlemen on horseback glided by her like shadows on the wall. "They are only dreams," said the crow. "They are coming to fetch the thoughts of the great people out hunting." "All the better, for we shall be able to look at them in their beds more safely. I hope that when you rise to honor and favor, you will show a grateful heart." "You may be quite sure of that," said the crow from the forest. They now came into the first hall, the walls of which were hung with rose-colored satin, embroidered with artificial flowers. Here the dreams again flitted by them, but so quickly that Gerda could not distinguish the royal persons. Each hall appeared more splendid than the last. It was enough to bewilder anyone. At length they reached a bedroom. The ceiling was like a great palm tree with glass leaves of the most costly crystal, and over the center of the floor 2 beds, each resembling a lily, hung from a stem of gold. One, in which the princess lay, was white. The other was red, and in this Gerda had to seek for little Kay. She pushed one of the red leaves aside and saw a little brown neck. Oh, that must be Kay. She called his name out quite loud and held the lamp over him. The dreams rushed back into the room on horseback. He woke and turned his head round. It was not little Kay. The prince was only like him in the neck. Still, he was young and pretty. Then the princess peeped out of her white lily bed and asked what was the matter. Then little Gerda wept and told her story and all that the crows had done to help her. "You poor child," said the prince and princess. Then they praised the crows and said they were not angry for what they had done, but that it must not happen again, and this time they should be rewarded. "Would you like to have your freedom?" asked the princess, "or would you prefer to be raised to the position of court crows with all that is left in the kitchen for yourselves?" Then both the crows bowed and begged to have a fixed appointment, for they thought of their old age and said it would be so comfortable to feel that they had provision for their old days, as they called it. And then the prince got out of his bed and gave it up to Gerda. He could do no more, and she lay down. She folded her little hands and thought, "How good everyone is to me, men and animals too." Then she closed her eyes and fell into a sweet sleep. All the dreams came flying back again to her, and they looked like angels, and one of them drew a little sledge on which Kay sat and nodded to her. But all this was only a dream and vanished as soon as she awoke. The following day she was dressed from head to foot in silk and velvet, and they invited her to stay at the palace for a few days and enjoy herself, but she only begged for a pair of boots and a little carriage and a horse to draw it, so that she might go into the wide world to seek for Kay. And she obtained not only boots, but also a muff, and she was neatly dressed. And when she was ready to go, there at the door she found a coach made of pure gold, with a coat of arms of the prince and princess shining upon it like a star, and the coachman, footman, and outriders all wearing golden crowns on their heads. The prince and princess themselves helped her into the coach and wished her success. The forest crow, who was now married, accompanied her for the first 3 miles. He sat by Gerda's side, as he could not bear riding backwards. The tame crow stood in the doorway flapping her wings. She could not go with them because she had been suffering from headache ever since the new appointment, no doubt from eating too much. The coach was well stored with sweet cakes, and under the seat were fruit and gingerbread nuts. "Farewell, farewell," cried the prince and princess, and little Gerda wept, and the crow wept. And then, after a few miles, the crow also said farewell, and this was the saddest parting. However, he flew to a tree and stood flapping his black wings as long as he could see the coach, which glittered in the bright sunshine. Fifth story, Little Robber Girl. The coach drove on through a thick forest, where it lighted up the way like a torch and dazzled the eyes of some robbers who could not bear to let it pass them unmolested. "It is gold! It is gold!" cried they, rushing forward and seizing the horses. Then they struck the little jockeys, the coachman and the footman dead, and pulled little Gerda out of the carriage. "She is fat and pretty, and she has been fed with the kernels of nuts," said the old robber woman, who had a long beard and eyebrows that hung over her eyes. "She is as good as a little lamb. How nice she will taste." And as she said this, she drew forth a shining knife that glittered horribly. "Oh!" screamed the old woman the same moment, for her own daughter, who held her back, had bitten her in the ear. She was a wild and naughty girl, and the mother called her an ugly thing, and had not time to kill Gerda. "She shall play with me," said the little robber girl. "She shall give me her muff and her pretty dress, and sleep with me in my bed." And then she bit her mother again, and made her spring in the air and jump about, and all the robbers laughed and said, "See how she is dancing with her young cub." "I will have a ride in the coach," said the little robber girl, and she would have her own way, for she was so self-willed and obstinate. She and Gerda seated themselves in the coach and drove away over stumps and stones into the depths of the forest. The little robber girl was about the same size as Gerda, but stronger. She had broader shoulders and a darker skin. Her eyes were quite black, and she had a mournful look. She clasped little Gerda round the waist and said, "They shall not kill you as long as you don't make us vexed with you. I suppose you are a princess?" "No," said Gerda, and then she told her all her history and how fond she was of little Kay. The robber girl looked earnestly at her, nodded her head slightly, and said, "They shan't kill you, even if I do get angry with you, for I will do it myself." And then she wiped Gerda's eyes and stuck her own hands in the beautiful muff which was so soft and warm. The coach stopped in the courtyard of a robber's castle, the walls of which were cracked from top to bottom. Ravens and crows flew in and out of the holes and crevices, while great bulldogs, either of which looked as if they could swallow a man, were jumping about. But they were not allowed to bark. In the large and smoky hall a bright fire was burning on the stone floor. There was no chimney, so the smoke went up to the ceiling and found a way out for itself. Soup was boiling in a large cauldron, and hares and rabbits were roasting on the spit. "You shall sleep with me and all my little animals tonight," said the robber girl after they had something to eat and drink. So she took Gerda to a corner of the hall where some straw and carpets were laid down. Above them, on laths and perches, were more than 100 pigeons, who all seemed to be asleep, although they moved slightly when the two little girls came near them. "These all belong to me," said the robber girl, and she seized the nearest to her, held it by the feet, and shook it till it flapped its wings. "Kiss it," cried she, flapping it in Gerda's face. "There sit the wood pigeons," continued she, pointing to a number of laths and cages which had been fixed into the walls near one of the openings. "Both rascals would fly away directly if they were not closely locked up. And here is my old sweetheart, Bah!" And she dragged out a reindeer by the horn. He wore a bright copper ring round his neck and was tied up. We are obliged to hold him tight too, or else he would run away from us also. I tickle his neck every evening with my sharp knife, which frightens him very much." And then the robber girl drew a long knife from a chink in the wall and let it slide gently over the reindeer's neck. The poor animal began to kick, and the little robber girl laughed and pulled down Gerda into bed with her. "Will you have that knife with you while you are asleep?" asked Gerda, looking at it in great fright. "I always sleep with a knife by me," said the robber girl. "No one knows what may happen. But now tell me again all about little Kay and why you went out into the world." Then Gerda repeated her story over again, while the wood pigeons in the cage over her cooed and the other pigeons slept. The little robber girl put one arm across Gerda's neck and held the knife in the other, and was soon fast asleep and snoring. But Gerda could not close her eyes at all, and she knew not whether she was to live or die. The robbers sat round the fire singing and drinking, and the old woman stumbled about. It was a terrible sight for a little girl to witness. Then the wood pigeons said, "Coo, coo, we have seen little Kay." A white fowl carried his sledge, and he sat in the carriage of the Snow Queen, which drove through the wood while we were lying in our nest. She blew upon us, and all the young ones died excepting us two. Coo, coo. "What are you saying up there?" cried Gerda. "Where was the Snow Queen going? Do you know anything about it?" "She was most likely traveling to Lapland, where there is always snow and ice. Ask the reindeer that is fastened up there with a rope." "Yes, there is always snow and ice," said the reindeer, "and it is a glorious place. You can leap and run about freely on the sparkling ice plains. The Snow Queen has her summer tent there, but her strong castle is at the North Pole on an island called Spitzbergen." "Oh, Kay, little Kay," sighed Gerda. "Lie still," said the robber girl, "or I shall run my knife into your body." In the morning, Gerda told her all that the wood pigeons had said, and the little robber girl looked quite serious and nodded her head and said, "That is all talk. That is all talk. Do you know where Lapland is?" she asked the reindeer. "Who should know better than I do?" said the animal, while his eyes sparkled. "I was born and brought up there, and used to run about the snow-covered plains." "Now listen," said the robber girl. "All our men are gone away. Only Mother is here, and here she will stay. But at noon she always drinks out of a great bottle, and afterwards sleeps for a little while. And then I'll do something for you." Then she jumped out of bed, clasped her mother round the neck, and pulled her by the beard, crying, "My own little nanny goat, good morning." Then her mother filliped her nose till it was quite red, yet she did it all for love. When the mother had drunk out of the bottle and was gone to sleep, the little robber maiden went to the reindeer and said, "I should like very much to tickle your neck a few times more with my knife, for it makes you look so funny. But never mind, I will untie your cord and set you free, so that you may run away to Lapland. But you must make good use of your legs, and carry this little maiden to the castle of the Snow Queen, where her playfellow is. You have heard what she told me, for she spoke loud enough, and you were listening." Then the reindeer jumped for joy, and the little robber girl lifted Gerda on his back and had the forethought to tie her on, and even to give her her own little cushion to sit on. "Here are your fur boots for you," said she, "for it will be very cold, but I must keep the muff, it is so pretty. However, you shall not be frozen for the want of it. Here are my mother's large warm mittens. They will reach up to your elbows. Let me put them on. There, now your hands look just like my mother's." But Gerda wept for joy. "I don't like to see you fret," said the little robber girl. "You ought to look quite happy now. And here are 2 loaves and a ham so that you need not starve." These were fastened on the reindeer, and then the little robber maiden opened the door, coaxed in all the great dogs, and then cut the string with which the reindeer was fastened with her sharp knife and said, "Now run, but mind you take good care of the little girl." And then Gerda stretched out her hand with the great mitten on it towards the little robber girl and said, "Farewell." And away flew the reindeer, over stumps and stones, through the great forest, over marshes and plains as quickly as he could. The wolves howled and the ravens screamed, while up in the sky quivered red lights like flames of fire. "There are my old northern lights," said the reindeer. "See how they flash?" And he ran on, day and night, still faster and faster. But the loaves and the ham were all eaten by the time they reached Lapland.